Umlungisi Sisulu, Alfred Nzo, Eric Malobi, Curtis Nkondo, Ken Temba, Zwelake Sisulu, Tomuntata, Joan Tlantla, Khabisi Mosonkutu. Also in West Park today that we remember, David Webster, Neil Agate, and more recently, Karima Brown. Now, there might well be a range of other names that I have not found here. But at least in this section of Heroes Acre here, you will find all of these people here. And as we gather to remember and pay homage to Uncle Kathy, we pay homage to many of those who also are resting here today, perhaps not in peace, but who are resting here. Today we also remember Sham Govender, KZN activist. Many of you have read about him. And Cecil Esso, who was also, the memorial was yesterday, who represent the generation of the 80s. And that generation slowly is now also starting to occupy burial grounds across the country. And Ismail, it is that generation whose stories needs to also start to be recorded as a matter of urgency. So as we gather here today on the 4th anniversary of Uncle Kathy's death, more than 50,000 South Africans officially have died from the virus. The unofficial estimates are probably closer to 120, 130,000. That's a whole FNB stadium full. If you want to really imagine what the devastation of this virus has been. But the world grapples with what is called vaccine apartheid today. And that kind of global discrimination is something that Uncle Kathy would have wanted us to be more vocal about. And I'm happy that people like Fatima Hassan and others have taken up that particular battle. But it requires many of us to be more vocal on that issue as well today. We have a program here that today we want to show you who are the torch bearers of Ahmed Kathrada's legacy. And they will come and sing and they will speak here today. But let me just find out, is Nompendulo Nkachwa here? She's still on her way. Okay. Now, a close friend of the foundation, but more closer, I suppose, son of Uncle Kathy, Selo Atang, from the Nelson Mandela Foundation. Selo has walked a long road with the foundation, and more so at the time of his death, helped us deal with perhaps one of the most difficult moments that many of us had to face here. And I think it gives me great pleasure to ask Selo to just come and say a few words about the struggle against forgetting, his own tribute to Ahmed Kathrada. Selo, over to you.
Thank you so much, Sean. Thank you very much, Sean. It's an absolute honor to be here today. Yeah, when Sean asked, yeah, this weekend has been a little emotional for me because I was faced with a few firsts. So this morning I got up at 4 a.m. to drive from the Drakensberg, where I climbed the Drakensberg in honor of a brother of mine who died to COVID, and we summited yesterday. And this morning I drove through to come back here in order to honor Mr. K. It's been emotional also because it's my first speech that I'm giving, a public address that I'm giving since the crisis that we faced at the Nelson Mandela Foundation. Some of you will know that I was on leave of absence because of some allegations that had been made against me. And Sean, I'll never forget those calls, those many messages that you sent me over that period when I was in a tunnel that felt like there was no light at all. And you kept on saying, no, there is light. So I want to thank you very much. And I'm grateful. So Dimpo and I are happy to be back in the saddle. We are happy that we can do what we are supposed to be doing, but we can't relax because those who did it went to the Sunday Times again to say that they reject the report and they will continue to do the work that they've been doing. In a way, again, it reminds us that that's what we faced with as a country, that those who thieved against the country are not relaxing. They want to thieve some more, but that we must not. Also, we must be unrelenting in fighting back. I looked up to Mr. K, and Sean, I think you captured it well, that I considered him to be a father, a grandfather. He came to my home in the Northwest. My mother tells that story every time it changes, how Mr. K came. And I never correct her because every time it changes, it has more, it grows bigger and bigger. Mr. K arrived and it was as if there was a red carpet across the street. And every time it gets better, I'm like, no, that's how it happened. So, and I loved him dearly. And I continue to love him. I continue to miss him every day. When I was going through what I went through, one of the things I did was to go through an email he sent me when I was appointed as CEO of the Nelson Mandela Foundation. That email keeps me going every time I feel down. Because in that email, he said, I believe in you and I know that you will make great of this institution. And when I hosted President Obama that morning, that day rather, it was dedicated to Mr. K because one of the things he had asked for is the Nelson Mandela annual lecture must be held in a stadium. So I think, Sean, that day I should have resigned because I wouldn't have had the nonsense that I dealt with now, because I would have then dropped the mic back then. Of course, Mr. K was schooled in movement with many memory projects and memory institutions. The decades-long projects to publish Long Walk to Freedom, Maibuye, Robben Island Museum, Constitution Hill, the AKF, and the Nelson Mandela Center of Memory. One of the not so widely known facts is that it was Mr. K who first started talking about the Mandela Presidential Library while he was still serving with Madiba in the presidency. And when the NMF was established, the Center of Memory as a special project, it was Mr. K who became the special advisor to it and served faithfully in that capacity for many years. For Mr. K, it was imperative that we not forget, that we remember where we have come from, and that we ensure that the youth know their histories. He had a profound influence on the NMF. All of our work begins with memory. Our archive is a public resource to be mobilized for continuing struggles for justice. We insist that reckoning with our past is fundamental to the making of a liberatory future. Memory is an indispensable tool right now in 2021, and as we face multiple challenges, I should say. I think I want to end off with how the last time I saw Mr. K alive was the day before he passed on his hospital bed. I held his hand tightly. I wept. And I could see that he was lying there, not even conscious that I was there. But I knew he could feel me. I will always remember that day, particularly now that people die a very lonely death due to COVID. No families holding their hands. just to reassure them that the other world is also just as safe. In the same vein, as Sean said earlier on, we must agitate for the vaccine to be made widely available and not be the preserve of the rich. To the Kathrada family, your loss 4 years ago was not just yours. It was an international loss. It remains a loss for all of us. We will always love you, Mr. K. We'll always miss you. Thank you very much.
This is also saying that this is the color that we want to see all of the crooks in as soon as possible. And Uncle Kathy adds his voice to it today. Nompentulo, are you here now? Yes, sis. Do you want a minute just to gather your breath? You should be fine. Okay. One of the new, not so new anymore, but one of the younger board members of the Kathrada Foundation, 2 years ago we took a decision to at least ensure that a quarter of the board of the AKF had to be under 50, I'm ashamed to say. Because all of us were way over that. We were moving to the other side of 50. Dom Pentula is one of them who agreed to join this foundation and who agreed to begin to take forward this legacy of Uncle Kathy. Member of Parliament for the ANC, former youth leader, student leader, but also a student, graduate, and somebody who's now still continuing his studies. Over to you, Nompendulo.
Good morning to you all. It's really an honor to be with you this morning. Uncle Sean, Uncle Derek shouldn't be here. Comrade Derek, I don't think is here with us today. To all members of the board, members of the AKF Youth Wing and the choir, Comrade Murafimu Roabe, Mr. Silo Hatang, and to all friends of the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation, good morning. As I said, it's really an honor to be with you all, but it's also an honor to be a young member of the Ahmed Kathrada Board of Trustees. This morning, I think, as Uncle Sean has said, we observe the 4th anniversary of the passing of Ahmed Kathrada, and as such, we pay tribute to him by honoring and remembering his legacy. It's my belief that Uncle Kathy would have been really pleased with the increased representation of young people on the board of the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. And we'd like to see more young people as the years go by. Not to eradicate the old people, of course, or the matured people, rather. And we all know that Uncle Kathy joined politics at the age of 12, and as such was a dedicated youth activist. And even as he grew older, one would want to say he continued to remain in touch with young people. When I was speaking to Shafi Farachia yesterday, just reflecting on what I would say this morning, he said even in Uncle Kathy's matured age, he remained a youth activist. My first personal encounter with Uncle Kathy was in 2015 when he came to support the WITS protests, the student protests at WITS University. And his dedication to the youth, the AKF's youth program remains vibrant, robust, and relevant. And recently, the youth program of the foundation raised its concerns with board members regarding the recent student protests, which were sparked by the anxieties around the shortfall of funding for NSFAS, which was later addressed, of course, as you would have witnessed in the news. But the continued issues around historic debt and the missing middle, amongst other challenges in the sector. The youth wing of the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation speaks to what the president always refers to in the importance of social compacting and the fact that many societal challenges and ills cannot be addressed solely by government, but need the support of the private sector, need the support of civil society, as well as various social institutions. And I think Uncle Sean and the youth in emphasizing that we must reflect as the board and as the youth wing on the current student protest was very important and speaks to this particular motion or notion around social compacting. And I think in addressing the various challenges that face the higher education sector, it's important that organizations like the AKF, together with its youth wing, continue to advocate for these matters to be addressed and continue to contribute to resolving issues in this particular discourse. And I think it would greatly concern Uncle Kathy where he rests, that we still have these remaining disparities and challenges within the higher education sector. Today, we put Uncle Kathy's life under very difficult realities that we would have never imagined as society. The COVID-19 pandemic had an incredible socio-economic impact on the lives of society across the world. The COVID-19 pandemic has required that governments, the healthcare sector, and societies at large fought day and night over the last year to protect and save the right to life. This moment has exacerbated and brought to surface many of the intrinsic inequities in many societies. This moment has influenced a great shift in human relation and modus operandi. Life, we can all agree, will never be the same post this moment, and it requires that we proactively envisage what it should look like post this moment. I think it's very important that we, as Africans, try and find a way for us to determine how our lives should be like post this particular moment. We say that despite the difficulties of operating in such difficult times, the foundation has been, by the grace of our foremothers and our forefathers, remained in existence and in presence. And for those who might not necessarily agree with my reference to foremothers and forefathers, maybe one should just say that it is through the hard work of Uncle Sean and his collective and the dedication of board members that we have been able to continue with the legacy of Uncle Kathy. We trust that the foundation will continue to adapt and regroup under these times of which we exist in. It is without doubt that the work of the foundation remains essential now and even post-COVID in South Africa, as racial disparities and other inequities continue to exist. It is now more than ever that we need organizations as this one to do work in our communities, with our youth, to remind us of our history and archive it, to hold government and society accountable, and to continue advocating overall for the promotion of the values, rights, and principles enshrined in the Freedom Charter and in the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. This month, we also commemorated Human Rights, or Human Rights Day, and this pandemic has indicated that whilst we try to protect this particular fundamental basic human right to life, many other first, second, and third generation human rights were impacted on and limited to a great extent. But what must remain a commitment of all of us here is that we got these hard-gained rights enshrined in our Bill of Rights from any elements that seek to undermine them and regress the gains of our democracy. In the undying spirit of Uncle Kathy, we must here and now recommit ourselves to defending our democracy. I want to say that one last time. In the undying spirit of Uncle Kathy, we must here and now recommit ourselves, every single one of us, to defending our democracy. One of the greatest reflections of this foundation is that it's a safe space for all activists across the spectrum, and as such it must remain so. So we must look forward to the inputs of Mr. Morobe, or Comrade Morobe. Shafi proofread my speech this morning, and he said, "Why are you referring to him as Mr. Murobe? He's Comrade Murobe." Mr. Hatam, and the AKF youth and Korea. I just want to share something that Shafi wrote to me. Often when we stand before many podiums, people think that we like write the speeches ourselves from head to toe. But when we stand here, we don't speak on behalf of ourselves alone. You know, we don't represent ourselves. We represent many other young people. And there's something Shafi wrote to me this morning as he read through my speech, and he said, when we reflect on the lessons of Uncle Kathy in relation to COVID and in dealing with COVID, I think Uncle Kathy would have wanted us to think about the next person before we think about ourselves. He said Uncle Kathy would have required us to ask ourselves, how will my actions endanger the next person? How will my actions harm the next person? He says, for the Uncle Kathy I know would have placed the well-being of others as a key priority in our efforts to survive and overcome this pandemic. I think COVID has really, as I speak to young kids and I visit many schools, and at the beginning of when we try to, our first attempt to try and reintegrate society back into schools, I'd say to the kids, this moment almost, your selfishness in wanting to protect yourself is a selfless act. So I don't know if that makes sense, but in trying to protect yourself, and if you were to just keep to yourself, which is really weird because we're not used to that, we're not used to keeping to ourselves and it almost feels rude to social distance. But this particular moment has required that we try and be selfish, but in our selfish act, we are selfless because we ensure that we protect the next person's life. So in every action that we've had to do, or in our behavior overall during this particular pandemic, we've had to always think about the next person. So I don't know about some of you, but when you stand in a queue at the supermarket, even though you think you're protecting yourself from COVID, you're protecting the next person from COVID as well. And I think we've consistently, some of us had to rewire ourselves to think about how my actions, how I live my life, how I don't wear my mask, how I don't sanitize. When you walk into a supermarket and you go and buy food, think about where you come from. And if you touch whatever you touch in that room without sanitizing, someone else is going to touch whatever you've touched in that room too. And what impact does that have on that person's life? So I think this particular moment, Uncle Kathy, Shafi's correct, would have really required for us to be as selfless as possible, and to really think about how our actions have an impact on the next person's life. It remains a great honor, as I said, to be with all of you. And I really want to reiterate, as someone who is in the position that they're in, that it is absolutely important that we continue to defend our democracy. And I think many of the initiatives and programs of the Ahmed Kathrada speak exactly to the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation speak exactly to this. Khululekani namhlanje, I think allow yourself to be in this particular moment and to allow yourself to reflect as you sit, even though you might not speak, but as you sit where you are, khululekani, and allow yourselves to be in the moment and to reflect on what Uncle Kathy, on how Uncle Kathy would have been wanting us to live our lives in this particular era. Long live the undying spirit of Uncle Kathy, long live.
So now you must take this orange mask and replace the one that you have there. Yeah, thank you. All right. For me, this is really the highlight of the program that we get into now. And I want to just call up the following young people here. Cabello, Jacques, Kristen, Nabila, Irfan. If you would please come forward. So Cabello is a public relations and communications graduate from UJ, and he currently works as a youth organizer in the AKF. Jacques is the chairperson of the AKF Lehigh Youth Club. He also works in our archive section, but he's also a hip-hop musician who uses his lyricism to paint a picture of reality and inspire hope amongst his fans. Jacques is also a refugee in this country. Kristen Abrams is an outgoing staff member of the AKF, now going to do a LLB. Nabila Khan holds a degree in public management and governance, is part of the AKF Lenasia Youth Club, has worked for the Media Review Network, Democracy Works, and Amnesty International. And Irfan says he's an intersectional community and youth activist, but he manages our youth program, and he's really the driving force behind much of the youth work that you now do, some of which you will see here today. So we thought it important today to ask these young people in 3 minutes just to come and share their reflections and what Uncle Kathy's legacy means for them. We'll kick off with Cabello. Now, there is a request, you must decide. There's a request to remove your mask when you speak because the sound is actually quite muffled. I haven't observed it, but you might want to.
Good morning, everyone. 4 years ago today, when we buried Uncle Kathy here, I think I witnessed one of the most powerful moments that I've ever seen in my life. I saw a number of speakers that were here that really spoke about this great giant of our struggle. And I think I want to start by highlighting a key thing that's on the t-shirts of the young people that I hear. It says, igniting your power. And I think this is the key theme in Uncle Kathy's life. He was someone who able to find his power in moments of powerlessness. And you can see this from the age of 8, where he was orphaned from his family, and he found his power in the Young Communist League. And then later on in his life, when he was imprisoned, he found power in knowledge and studying while he was inside and fighting a lot of different battles while he was imprisoned. Uncle Kathy was someone who always had a deep passion for youth. I was always someone who was behind the camera, recording a lot of different things, and I just watch how he interacts with the young people, and you could see that this man had a lot of passion for young people. But one key moment that I remember was at his flat. One of the first few occasions I went to his flat. When we went there, he welcomed us with such warmth. He was interacting with a young author who was 14 years at the time. His name was Karabo Nkoli. And that moment for me was a moving moment, because I saw the excitement in his eyes. I saw the hope that he had for the young people of this country. And I saw the joy that it gave him to see that a young person like Karabo was doing something so powerful. I mean, being an author at the age of 14, telling a lot of your peers that this is the route that they should follow. I mean, it was something that was very powerful for me. But apart from that, I think a key advice that Uncle Kathy gave Karabo on that day was that he should always and try and ensure that he goes to school and he gets an education. And that's not only an advice that Uncle Kathy gave to Karabo, but it's an advice that he gave to a lot of other young people. And I think in the current context, it's very sad to see the things that are happening to students at the moment. Young people, it's very difficult for young people to get an education, especially young people who are coming from disadvantaged backgrounds. So I think today, as young people, we might be facing some of the toughest times, but I think we need to draw from the things that Uncle Kathy has taught us. We need to find our power. We need to know how to use our power. And we also need to keep fighting. For all of the young people that are part of youth clubs here today, we need to keep fighting. We need to not give up. And I think another thing that we should take from Uncle Kathy was the humanness that he had. I think both Uncle Kathy and Uncle Isu were people who were very human, who had a very caring side. I mean, every day at the office when they were there, we'd be greeted with hugs and, we'd be treated to all sorts of different things that would just show you just how human these people are. Behind being, these huge political leaders, they were also able to be humble and, to show the next person care and not feel like they are above them. So yes, I think those are the things that I'd like to leave here today that I take from Uncle Kathy's legacy. And I hope the fight will continue. Thank you.
Okay, change your mask there, Cabello. Nabila?
Good morning, everyone. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you to Ahmed Kathrada Foundation for having me here and giving me this platform to speak. I am part of the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation in Asia Youth Club, and it's been 3 years now since I've joined, and it's been an incredible experience, not only to see how the clubs have grown, but to engage with young people every day who are actively doing work to change the living circumstances that they find themselves in. And for me, to see the clubs and the way in which they operate and the way in which they are growing is a actual reflection on the legacy that Ahmed Kathrada has left for us. And for that, I thank him. I thank those that came before him, those that came after him for teaching us and actually paving the way for us to take forward the fight for justice. As being someone who was born in 1994, I'm considered to be a democracy baby. So I actually have no context of what it was like to live during apartheid, but for me, it has been incredibly important as an activist to learn about the history and learn about what happened before us. And through engaging on this, through reflecting on the struggles that were actually, the liberation activists had to go through, what you tend to see is a dedication, a persistence, and a commitment to change. It was an undying struggle and fight that they had that we now see in our youth today. Being an activist, we see that living in a post-apartheid South Africa, there are so many challenges that have propped up since, the advent of democracy. Some things like, access to adequate education, access to healthcare, GBV, climate change, xenophobia. These are a lot of issues that are affecting our young people. And there are individuals, in South Africa who like to make the debate that our youth are becoming apathetic, our youth are disengaged. And to individuals like that, I would say I completely disagree. Our youth may not necessarily be taking up formal platforms of democracy or democratic processes, but what we have seen, not only through our youth clubs, but through the movements over the past few years, is that youth are actually taking up political and protest spaces to say enough is enough. We will not be silenced and our voice is valid. We've had movements such as Roads Must Fall, Fees Must Fall, the GBV protests that have been coming up, where we are seeing young voices coming out and saying, we will not be silent any further. I think, at the climate of South Africa, what we see in a lot of our political spaces and institutions are individuals who are holding up space because they feel that young people are not experienced enough. And it is from this levels of alienation and exclusion that I would make the debate that our young people are feeling frustrated. They are feeling as if they're not being taken serious enough. So when we ask, how can we as young people take forward the democratic values that Ahmed Kathrada fought for, the democratic values that people like Tom and Tata, people like Nelson Mandela fought for and, imprisoned for, we also need to be questioning and challenging our institutions to say that you also need to be embodying those democratic values. You need to be giving us those spaces to actually come up and provide the solutions. We are a very young population. We have a very young demographic, and it is based that our youth are our democracy. So when I look at our youth, I know that protests, marching, social media, these are our means of getting our voices out there. But one of the lessons I've learned from looking at the life of Ahmed Kathrada is that activism is not linear. Activism cannot exist in a vacuum. Activism cannot be biased. So we need to be looking at how do we now engage our local leaders. We need to be actually attending council meetings, addressing our local councillors, asking them what are they actually doing to make sure that the issues that we are putting forward are being addressed. And it's only through this where we actually get a holistic approach to our activism, where we are actually actively engaging with the democracy that is before us. We owe it to ourselves as activists and to our future generations to actually embody the democracy that we have fought for and the Constitution. These processes exist for a reason, and we need to start using them as means of change. Yes, the system has actively engaged to oppress us in a lot of ways. We see a lot of institutions and a lot of systems that carry on the legacy of apartheid. But it's also through these systems that we are now able to engage them and actually look forward as to how we actually enact change. So as I pass on, I just want to say once again, thank you to Mr. B, the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation, the youth of the youth clubs who continue to fight, continue to carry on the legacy, unapologetically carry on the legacy of Ahmed Kathrada. Thank you.
Thanks, Nikita. Thank you. Let me also acknowledge Mashila Sisulu. Thank you for being here. And we also have Minister Mahmoud Kombo and family from Zanzibar who's here as well, joining us. Thank you very much for coming through. I think we all wish we could rather be in Zanzibar than sitting out here. Now, there's a very special young man came to the foundation and said, look, I'm a refugee here, struggling to get my papers, all kinds of things, and I really just want to volunteer. In the last 2 years, Jacques, working with Yasmin, have really been at the heart of ensuring that we have a comprehensive, cataloged, digitized archive of material relating to Uncle Kathy, but to many other people who have also deposited their material to the foundation. All of this without having been trained in any issues of any work of archival work. Today, I would say that he is self-taught. He is the go-to person in our office for all IT work, again, self-taught. But he is also a musician, a poet. So it's a huge honor for us to ask Jacques to come and say a few words. I don't think he's actually spoken in public here before. So give him a big round of applause.
Thank you, Mr. B. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to appreciate the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation for this opportunity, and as well thank everyone that's here with us. My name is Jacques Bona, a young South African of Burundian origin. I came to South Africa when I was only 11 years old with my mother, father, and younger brother who was only 8 years old at the time. Because of the ongoing civil war in Burundi, forced my family and I to seek refuge in South Africa, which now has become my home. I stand here today to share my thoughts and reflection on the exemplary life of internationalist and lifelong activist Ahmed Kathrada. I have never met Uncle Kathy, as many call him, but in the work that I do at his foundation, assisting to accurate the work of archive on him and his life, I have nothing but profound gratitude for his values and those of his generation of activists. I am inspired by the fact that Uncle Kathy strongly believes in the potential of young people, which are here with us this morning. His conviction for the betterment of our country continues up until his final resting place 4 years ago. Uncle Kathy's generation fought tirelessly for democracy, a democracy that they were not even sure they would live to see. Sentenced to life imprisonment in the Rivonia trial, he, Mandela, Mlangeni, and several others put their lives on the line for freedom, even if it meant that it should come. They will not be fun to see it, but this is a sacrifice they committed to until the very end. In South Africa, I have found refuge. I have made friends, colleagues, and once again, a deep sense of gratitude for all of the parts that make me who I am today. I embrace my Burundian self, my artistic nature, which fuse well with my South African identity. I support campaigns such as the newly launched One MD Standing Up in Defense of our Democracy because I too see the vicious attacks aim towards these beautiful gains. It is important that we become aware of what is at stake and identify our role as young and old in taking the struggle forward. If we do not, we become complacent, we run the risk of watching our democracy getting eroded. And I, for, will never be proud to say that I was part of the reckless and self-serving generation. Uncle Kathy lies in his final resting place on the address known as the Heroes Acre. This may be a small gain for someone who was as modest as he was, but those who remember him felt that he deserved it. And I agree, he deserves to be remembered as a hero of his struggle, and his lessons need to find resonance in us. Living in a country where xenophobia and racism often raise their ugly heads, I vouch to Uncle Kathy that I will use my life, my voice, my music, and life experience to teach others on the dangers of racism. I have been judged on a number of occasions based on the color of my skin. My understanding of simple things have been deduced to how dark I am. I have been spoke to slowly and loudly because of how I look. The impression here is that because I am dark, I will not be able to hear and understand English or vernacular as well as someone less darker than me. My story is not unique. It is the story of so many others, but is nothing compared to the consequences of racism in the apartheid era, where so many people were killed in Sharpeville, in Soweto, Langa, the Motala raid in Mozambique, and so forth. My story is nothing compared to how Uncle Kathy and his generation will be dehumanized and treated not less than animals, deprived of accessing beaches, lift, school of their choices, and so much more. Hearing of these stories of Ame Timol, Nigel Agete, Vuyisile Mini, and others who died in the cause for justice and equality, I stand here to say in my mother tongue, Murakoze, Asante Sana, Mjomba, Kathrada. Thank you for sacrifices, for all that you did and stood for. Today, our struggles are different as we face the scourge of gender-based violence, femicide, sexism, and racism. But despite these fault lines, I stand here in hope instilled in me by Uncle Kathy's foundation that the time to move away from our comfort zone and join the struggle is now. Our democracy and justice systems are suffocating, and we as young people are the lifeline. We need to organize ourselves and take forward the legacy of integrity and servant activism in whatever field we are in. We need to engage ourselves in meaningful programs of actions that will help shape our understanding of democracy and injustice system. We also need to utilize platforms such as offered by the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation to the youth to organize, educate, and conscientize them politically, socially, and economically in the attempt of preparing them. I thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks, Jacques. You know, if when you go to Uncle Kathy's gravesite, all of these gravesites have been given numbers now. And appropriately, his is 007. So, I mean, thanks to City Parks for that kind of ironical work. A torchbearer, legacy carrier of Ahmed Kathrada, Irfan came on board to take forward the work relating to the workbook that we've developed to train young people on various issues relating to Uncle Kathy's life. Today, he heads up a youth program whose objective is, by the time we get to the centenary of Uncle Kathy in 2029, we want to have a minimum of 100 such youth clubs. They have moved with speed, and Irfan has said by the end of this year, we should be closer to 25 or 30. There are already 9 set up, and he's moving with speed. So over to you, Irfan. He also doubles up as Shay what? Shay Wu? Shay Mangera. Shay Mangera, okay.
Thanks, Mr. B. I'm a bit nervous to share my voice, especially after 3 powerful young people have shared such beautiful words, taking forward the legacy of Kathy that they see fit and how they see fit. When I was tasked to deliver this short speech, I struggled to put some words down, and this is because there's many life lessons of Uncle Kathy that I had hoped to take forward. And as Mr. B has said, in my work, it means ensuring that the young people who I teach and train and are part of this program can also embody. And one of the stark and glaring reminders that keeps popping up in my head over this last week was that we must remember, it's a quote from Uncle Kathy, and I'll quote it. We must realize that the fight for non-racialism, equality is not short-term work, but generational work. It requires a united effort, a lifetime of commitment, and as Madiba alluded, if needs be, we should be prepared to die. 4 years ago, Uncle Kathy had passed on, transitioning back into the underground structures. I recall a few days before his passing where we were outside his flat and many of us were gathered to pray and wish him well and a speedy recovery. And all of a sudden I was pushed to the front on the steps and made to speak in front of, I think there's a few media houses, including national media, and a group who was gathered there. And this was one of my first times presenting or speaking in front of national television. So it was a very nerve-wracking opportunity, and one of the first, as I mentioned. But being pushed forward, I think encompasses the work at the foundation and Uncle Kathy's legacy to push forward and take forward a particular type of work that's not necessarily embodied across communities today, but we hope that through this program we can do so. Now, I recall this moment being pushed forward because it was in a space that I didn't think I belonged, a space where I thought my voice was not to be shared. And this moment allowed me to recognize my own voice and to find value in my own voice. Kathy was always one who, as my brother Cabello mentioned, empowered young people. And I too have drawn strength from that power and that legacy. 4 years later, it is that very same voice that now echoes in school halls and youth clubs, shared in song, as many of you know, I do sing a bit, shared in training workshops, shared in debates and discussions, and shared on multiple platforms where we can spread a message and spread ideas that Uncle Kathy stood for. And these ideas and these messages are often considered very heavy, but one filled with fulfillment. They are, or it is, a message of love and dedication. It is a voice that recognizes the past, understands the sacrifices made, but equally calls on people to take action towards a just state. 4 years later, thousands of young people in this country and abroad, might I add, having taken the workbook to South Korea at a youth conference, and to many others who have now become friends of the youth program and the foundation. These young people have learned about the history of Kathrada, not to immortalize him as a hero, but as somebody who represents a continued call to action, whose life embodied activism, and who demands of us to take some form of action wherever we can. It is a call to champion the fight against corruption, moral decay, and racism. 4 years later, we continue to take forward our work in memory of Kathrada, embodied in commitment, sometimes perhaps overly committed, if I might add, dedication, discipline, and care for all those that we lead and that we share in meals, share in our homes, and share in our youth clubs with. 4 years later, when we speak of the struggle for justice and democracy, we must know that it was Kathy himself that said the youth will ultimately bear the biggest brunt in the struggle and in the struggles ahead, and that no struggle will be won in boardrooms or drawing or conference tables. It must ultimately be fought and won in the hearts and minds of people, ordinary people in their communities. And this to me means empowering our citizenry to become critical thinkers, to become active participants in the democratic process, and as Nabila said, to engage in all spheres of government, locally, nationally, and even globally as well. It's a fight that needs a collective and a broad-based movement, and I think that also symbolizes Uncle Kathy and who he stood for. To fight against a status quo today that allows for 50% of youth to be unemployed, without hope, left without hope, that has normalized pit toilets in schools, and has made drugs and alcohol so readily available in our communities that hopelessness becomes entrenched in our psyche. And of course, a fight that ensures, or rather that we hope to ensure, that all young people are able to reach their full potential. As Honorable Comrade and Board Member Nompendulo said, sharing a voice is important, and you don't necessarily, me being here is not just about me, but about the youth who all have come from this program, who've gone through life. There are many others, board members as well, who've come through this program. And that voice is very important. It's a voice that we hope many of the Kathrada youth take forward. And we hope that they carry with them the best of values that Kathy stood for, the best of principles, and the best of ideas that we hope to see entrenched in our society. It is in them that I have hope, and it is through them that the fight and struggle for justice will be realized and fought across the many communities that we work in. Building a movement of grassroots youth activists, attempting to tackle issues at a local level, and now finding space at national levels. Just yesterday, we were part of a national conference dealing with climate change. So many more young people from our groups are taking strides in taking their activism forward. As Mr. B has said, by the year 2029, we want to ensure that Uncle Kathy's centenary is celebrated by over 100 youth clubs across South Africa, so that this voice and this legacy work can be taken forward. These are the young people and many more who are behind the tent, who are coming to sing a song, are the ones who are entrusted to take that legacy forward, aside from those in the foundation. And it is through them, it is because of them, not only as young activists, but it's because that they realize that there's a future there's a future that they want to become a reality, a future that Uncle Kathy dreamed of, but one that they are actually actively working towards achieving. So we hope that they can continue the democracy work, strengthening the democracy and ensuring that our society becomes one that is just and fair for all. Amandla.
Didn't you just love that quote, that little insertion about going back to the underground? Thanks, Irfan. Our last young person, sadly, is somebody that who speaks today and leaves tomorrow from the foundation. Somebody who's been with us for over 2 years, came in having finished studies, not sure what she wanted to do, volunteered, became part of the full-time staff, has really been together with Zakira. You know, these two young women have been causing a revolution in this country. Their tireless work in dealing with issues of corruption and state capture and building all kinds of alliances to make sure that this issue is not left unconfronted in this country. It's with regret and with pleasure that I call Kristen Abrams to come here. Tomorrow she goes back to studies full-time LLB student, knowing that once that is done, she will find a space back in the foundation and other areas of work that we are associated with. So I ask you to say thank you to Kristen for her efforts, but also welcome her as she now makes a departing speech.
Morning, everybody. It's not a departing speech. People say that the foundation is like Hotel California and you can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. And I'm feeling that already. So it's not a departing speech by any means, but it is my last or second last day formally as a staff member. And Uncle Sean has asked me to reflect on taking forward Uncle Kathy's legacy of fighting for democracy and equality. And so I have to check this my contribution
by saying that much of my own exposure to Uncle Kathy's life and legacy has been through this foundation, which I think has been so genuine in carrying out Uncle Kathy's legacy since his death 4 years ago, which is not an easy task to do at all. And so I'm deeply grateful for my time at the AKF, which was really spent in the absence of its founder, but nonetheless has taught me so much, not only about Kathrada, but also about these values of equality and democracy. And then just a disclaimer before I begin. My contribution may feel a little bit like either an English literature analysis, and that's because before this law degree, I did major in English literature, but it may also feel a little bit like a sermon. That's just because it's a Sunday morning. This feels a bit like a pulpit, so please do indulge me. So like I said, much of my exposure, sorry, just hold on. Uncle Shan, you may need to hold my pages for me. Sorry. Okay. Those ones on that side because they're going to fly away.
Okay, I'm a page holder.
Thank you. Much of my exposure to Uncle Kathy has really been through the foundation and through this book in particular, through his letters from Robben Island. And what I've learned from these letters is really the humanness of Uncle Kathy. My favorite anecdote is when he's writing in a letter and he talks about raso, which is this Indian like drink or food that he says could cure a king-size hangover. And it's one of my favorite things ever because it makes me realize, hey, Uncle Kathy was just a man. Uncle Kathy had a hangover sometimes. Uncle Kathy drank raso. Uncle Kathy was a man. And I think this, for me, is a very important part on reflecting on how to take his legacy forward, is actually reckoning with this idea of Uncle Kathy as an ordinary human being. Because I think as young people, and possibly even as older people, we sometimes get stuck in this notion of seeing Uncle Kathy and the people of his generation as almost more than human. And in no way do I mean to discredit their character or their contribution to our democracy, but in fact, it's this resonance with their humanness for me that is most inspiring and encouraging. I think as younger people, we see these men and women in such a way that it almost becomes overwhelming to think about how you or your contribution could ever match that standard of activism. And even this concept of activism, I was telling Uncle Shan yesterday, I sometimes take a little bit of issue with it because it almost demarcates what an activist is. And for somebody who just feels that their contribution is based on what their model convictions are, you don't want to be excluded because you don't consider yourself an activist. And I don't know if Uncle Kathy and his generation necessarily saw themselves as activists at the get-go. I think they just saw themselves as men and women who had deep moral convictions about doing something to change their societies. And so it actually inspires me to think of Uncle Kathy as this young man who, just like any other young man or woman, had his thoughts, emotions, and ideas molded by the primary world that he inhabited, that he was taught by people and that he taught other people, that he had moments of doubt and moments of confidence, that he had moments of hope and moments of hopelessness, and that he had to make choices to fight against these issues that were morally repugnant in his society. It wasn't bestowed upon him from some higher power. It was a choice that he made. And so I think in taking forward his legacy, the first thing that I think we should do is reckon with this idea of him being just a human, because it takes away the notion that someone else was made for this work and that someone else should be doing it instead. And in fact, it places the responsibility on us, because it poses this question to us and makes us ask ourselves, okay, if these ordinary humans could make these choices to fight these ills in society, then why not me? And so that's the first thing I think that we should be reckoning with. But I think it would be amiss to not point out the qualities that made Uncle Kathy almost superhero-like or more than human. And for me, it's depicted very clearly in this one letter in which he's trying to explain his frustration with explaining to his warden why he wouldn't settle for a life of luxury and why he dedicate his life to struggle. And what he says here is he really expresses his displeasure with those who are secure and safe within the current system, who don't find the need. He says they close their eyes in their comfortability and they don't see that their way of life needs to be disturbed. And I'll speak to this a little bit more, but I think another example is this conversation that he has with Mandela, and it's this little anecdote that I've learned recently, where Uncle Kathy in prison is given the privilege to wear longer pants, and his African elders are made to wear short pants because this is symbolic of being boys. And Uncle Kathy goes to Mandela and says, I don't want to wear these short pants, these longer pants. I want to protest against this and say, give me the short pants instead. And I'll get back to Mandela's response a little bit later. But I think it shows this conviction of Uncle Kathy's that equality is not equality until his peers are also equal. Dignity is not dignity until everybody has dignity. And for right now, democracy is not real until it is experienced by all South Africans. And I'd like to link this to a sermon by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Because this sort of idea that until you are free, I am not free, is what Martin Luther King Jr. talks about as altruism. And he tells this parable in the sermon from the Bible that's about the Good Samaritan. And if you don't know it, in summary, it's basically about this man who gets really beaten up on this road that he's traveling on. And he gets robbed and terribly beaten and he's left for dead. And a rabbi or a priest walks past him and looks at him and thinks about whether he should help him and decides against it and continues on his way. And then a Levite, which is quite a prominent person in Jewish tradition, does exactly the same thing. And then the Samaritan, who is really a frowned upon person at the time, walks past this beaten up man and looks at him and decides to help him. And Martin Luther King Jr. travels this Jericho road in later years with his wife. And he says that he understands why the rabbi and the priest would walk past this man, because it's a really dangerous road with lots of twists and turns, and it would put you at danger if you stopped to help someone else. And so he says the question that the priest or the Levi probably ask themselves is, if I stop to help this man, what will happen to me? And contrastingly, the Samaritan is probably asking, if I do not stop to help this man, what will happen to him? And bringing it back to us, I think when we think about taking a stand on some issues, we think, what will happen to me, to my job, my status, my position, if I take a stand on this issue? And this is really what Martin Luther King calls a dangerous altruism. And I just want to read a quote. Sorry, I'm almost done. It says, the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy. The true neighbor will risk his position, his prestige, and even his life for the welfare of others. In dangerous valleys and hazardous pathways, he will lift some bruised and beaten brother to a higher and more noble life. And for me, this doesn't stop when Uncle Kathy's political career comes to an end. In 2016, he writes this letter asking for President Zuma to step down in what is dangerous altruism. It's saying, if I don't do this, what will happen to the people of South Africa? And he discards, and I don't think he just discards it. He says in his letter that he's a member of the ANC, and he lists all of his commitments to his party and so on. But I think he really reckoned with this notion that this could cost him. But he makes the decision to write this letter anyway, because it's in the benefit and for the benefit of other South Africans that this letter would serve. This is also called an excessive altruism, and it's just because
it goes far beyond the call of duty. It's not an obligation placed on you by law or anything else, but it's because you feel morally or otherwise
fellow man. And I'm really wrapping up. And so just to sum up what my reflections were on this is, one, that us being human is enough. You don't need to be called activist or referred to as comrade. You don't need to belong to a designation, either left or middle left or far, far left. You just need to be human. And let Uncle Kathy's humanness remind us that as humans, we still need to learn. We still get to learn. And sometimes it means that we need to unlearn. But let this be part of who we are and as we develop our own contribution. Last point. And the second reflection is that this excessive and dangerous altruism should underpin our efforts in striving for democracy and for equality. It's dangerous because it may cost you your status, your position, and require you to break with tradition, as Uncle Kathy says he does. And it's excessive because it calls you to not be satisfied with equality until that means equality for everybody. And going back to that anecdote, Mandela's response to Uncle Kathy was, don't wear the short pants, wear the long pants, and let us strive to get the level or the standard of equality where we are all wearing long pants. So in saying that equality must be equality for all, it needs to be a high standard of equality. And the same for democracy. So as you ponder these things, know that we currently face very real threats to our democracy. And may our response to this not be, what will happen to me if I take a stance against this? May it be, what will happen to them, to us, to all South Africans if I don't? Thank you. Sorry.
Your mask. You really deserve this mask. Comrades, friends, ladies and gentlemen, let me ask these 5 young people who spoke to please come back here, Kristen, Zakira, and all of you, just so that we can say a collective thank you to all of them. Irfan, I know you guys can walk a bit faster. Jacques. And this is just a sample of the kinds of young people who work at the foundation, but who also come from the youth clubs of the work of the foundation. And my appeal to many of you here as you sit, this foundation needs your support. It needs your skill support, it needs your financial support, we need all of your archival material as well. And I'm hoping that we've demonstrated the kind of capability and capacity who will take forward this work for generations to come. So on behalf of everybody here, thanks to all of you as well. As we close this part of the program, I'm going to ask somebody that I don't think needs to be introduced, Murphy Marobe. Now, Murphy, as many of you know, comes from the UDF, former Robben Islander and so forth. Today has been one of the initiators of the Defend Our Democracy campaign. And as his tribute to Uncle Kathy, Murphy will speak to that particular theme. Murphy? If you want. See. I think so. I have to spray this thing.
Good morning, everyone. it's such a privilege to have to come to speak with your job half done by those who've just spoken before me. So I'll take all their speeches as the salutation to my speech and say all protocols observed, and thank you, Mr. Bin, for having invited me. Somehow pressured me to come, but you know, Shan, he always has his way, but for a good cause, nevertheless. Now, you know, when we gather at the gravesite, at least in our culture, or I'm sure many other cultures, we are not going there to talk to ourselves. We go there to commune with those who have left us, to commune with our ancestors. We go there to report to them how we are doing, to give an update of whether what they left behind in our care is still in place, whether the children are still doing well at school. We report to them who has departed, who is not well. And we hope from that, if the report is a good one, they will shower us with greater blessings and insights for us to go back into life and do the best that we can, as they would expect us. So it is that we gather here today, not just to share fond memories of Comrade Kathy, but to invoke his revolutionary spirit to guide us through the turbulent seas that his organization, the ANC, and his beloved South Africa are in right now. We are here at Uncle Kathy's final resting place in this moment to once more reflect on our condition as a people and as a country, and to solemnly pledge our refusal to be bystanders and spectators as thieves and political opportunists degrade our constitution and our experience of the democracy it underpinned since 1994. We are here to say to Uncle Kathy and to report that the battle against corruption, which, as we had with reference to the letter that he wrote, which I think would have been his last battle that he joined before he passed, is still raging on. As the Zondo Commission continues to shine its relentless torch into the dark corners of our body politic and society to uncover the exact extent of this malice, we are left numb by the scale and brazenness of this cancer. We have come to see how even some who wore the mantle of revolution, shouting revolutionary slogans, turned out to be demagogues and thieves, feathering their nests at the expense of millions of South Africans, for whom the dawn of freedom was to remain just that, a long wintry dawn for whom the sun seems to have turned back at the horizon. We gather here today after an extraordinary week marked by a hint of an orange glow in the east, as the Defend Our Democracy campaign began to shine its glow of hope as its rays revealed the time-tested idea that people's power remains the best antidote against political deceit and corruption. Indeed, we gather here today at a time when it has become obvious that the People's Organization has morphed into something other than what they will refer to as the leader of society. Its ability to lead society out of the current conundrum has been seriously compromised to the extent that we are suffocating at the degree of cynical disdain expressed at just the mention of its name. The sense of a weakened democratic experience is palpable. The cancer has weakened so many institutions of state, including parliament, the legislatures, municipalities, leaving ordinary people vulnerable and exposed to those whose only desire is to mercilessly continue fleecing the system of its resources, which would have been utilized to fight poverty and social exclusion. But with the Defend Our Democracy campaign, I believe we have created a vehicle to give people hope. Hope that we can, as a people, rise up against the injustice of corruption. This hope is underpinned by a belief that it's only when we stand united as a people that we can lance the boil of corruption. After all, we now know that the threat to our democracy goes beyond that just that posed by any one individual, the most prominent of those individuals being Jacob Zuma, in whom has been revealed the embodiment of a political culture that is fundamentally an antithesis to democracy and characterized by a still ill-formed cult of the personality, ruled by factional dictate and nepotism, totalitarian inclinations, and
in it, spurious claims are made about how, among other things, many South African judges, including those of the Constitutional Court, can no longer bring an open mind to cases involving him. Despite having spanned all overtures from the court to submit his representations, he presents himself as a victim, with the entire judicial system having turned against him. A very sad ending indeed for someone who in previous platforms not only appointed the very same judges, presided over their swearing-in ceremonies, but also lauded our independent judiciary. But of course, that was all fine until he himself was now expected to present himself to the same system for adjudication. To these accusations against our judges, courts, and the judicial system, I will leave that to the relevant authorities to respond in their time. I know, though, that most South Africans will see through the ridiculousness of these allegations against the judiciary and continue to hope that justice will be served
one way or another. While we wait for the law to take its course, it is imperative for South Africans to mobilize behind the Defend Our Democracy campaign and to defend our Constitution banner. We trust that for many years, and delegated our agency to parties and deployed representatives. And notwithstanding some of the progress made since the end of apartheid, we, however, and this is more than just a feeling, have been robbed blind and our trust abused. We now know that our electoral system is part of the problem for why we are in this situation. The drums for change have started sounding louder and louder. Defend Our Democracy is being set up as a vehicle through which the compounding voice of the disaffected can be heard loud and clear by those in power. With about 11,225 people as of yesterday and 70 organizations from across the social spectrum having signed up behind the campaign, the calls for accountability can no longer be ignored. Spurred on by our initial achievements and appreciating the huge enthusiasm with which South Africans have embraced the campaign, plans are well in progress about consolidating these gains. These we aim to do around 4 key themes. The first one is that of defending our constitutional democracy and eradicating capture and bringing to a halt corruption and attendant looting of public resources. 2, by saying no to destabilization and call for action against people acting as if they were private militias. 3, defending our independent judiciary. And 4, intensification of our demand for accountability. On this one, we cannot rest because, as you know, since 1994, things changed when we became so comfortable. There was Nelson Mandela. We're all happy. Everybody loved him and we went about our ways. But in the meantime, the crooks were ensconcing themselves into all the nooks and crannies of our system so that they could benefit themselves. To this end, we commit ourselves to inspire activism and to promote the significance of civil society organizations as critical support systems for communities and for the promotion and protection of people's interest. I think the previous speaker mentioned the point of why non-governmental and civic organizations are important. We know for our experience, in fact, a lot has been written about this, that governments cannot reach every corner of any place. We need people in their own localities, in fact, to fill those gaps and to be, in fact, in charge of their own destiny. So we relentlessly inspire confidence amongst the people so that they can see through and counter the populist rhetoric and destabilization efforts of the state capture agents and their apologists. Through a program of action that is still being developed, it will be demonstrated that the majority of South Africans support the values and vision that inspired our Constitution. Importantly, we'll be seeking to bring greater accountability to the way in which we are being governed. And to attain this, it remains our intention to continue mobilizing the broadest representation of organized formations, irrespective of political affiliation. And I might even add here, even of class affiliation, because once you have a broad movement, the core principle and values of democracy should be able to apply to everybody, especially if, in fact, it's everybody under the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa. So defending this democracy cannot only be a working class issue or a peasant issue or a religious issue. It's everybody's concern. Furthermore, sectoral formations will be looked upon to bring in valuable inputs through their own programs of action and their participation in the Defend Our Democracy, Defend Our Constitution campaign. So, as we are here to say goodbye to Kathy, Comrade Kathy, today, when we leave today, we'll be doing so with the promise and the hope that next year when we come back here, we will deliver a progress report that he can be proud of. And in the meantime, we'll let him be and rest in peace in his bunker, underground bunker rather.
That's your replacement mask.
Thank you very much. This could have been a long speech, but you guys before me have said half of it. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Murphy. As we conclude this part of the program, I'm going to call on Ismail just to talk about the next history project that will be undertaken at the site of memory. And just to say that Ismail has also now finished the book on the Naidu family. And that book is something that we want to launch on the 10th of April. But let Ismail speak to some of these things. Here's the board now.
Thank you very much, Shan. It's amazing how in the last hour he's been re-Christianed from Comrade Shan, Uncle Shan, Mr. Bolton, Mr. B, Mr. Bean. So, Murphy, well done. Just a little anecdote about Kathy. He was released in October 1989. I was 29 years old, so I was a youth once upon a time. We forget those things. And one of the things we had to do over when he was released, in a few years after he was released, is that we had to drive him around. Shan, myself, a whole number of people had to drive him around to meetings, to events, etc. And Kathy always used to say, because we would want to leave at the last minute, and he would always tell us and tell me, Haji, I'd rather be at a place 15 minutes earlier than being 5 minutes late. So for young people particularly, this is important. He was a stickler with punctuality, so was Comrade Isu. We take these small things for granted, but it's important to instill that kind of discipline in young people from the word go, so that we appreciate time and we respect other people's time also. Now, I don't know how many people, Chan has asked me to talk very briefly about the history work that we're doing and the importance of history work. I don't know how many people have had a chance to look at this book. It's by Ronnie Caswells. It's called A Simple Man, Caswells and the Zuma Enigma. Now, on page 146, Caswells says that in August 2008, it's not very long ago, in the Star newspaper here in Johannesburg, it carried an article. You know, the newspapers carry this small little thing which says 50 years ago in history. I think the Sunday Times might also have it, or some of the papers have this thing, just to reflect back 40 years ago or 50 years ago. So the Star had this particular little thing about history, and this is what was written in that little piece. It says Jacob Zuma's jailed, and the little clip says Jacob Zuma, a prominent member of the banned African National Congress, an activist in the ANC's military wing Mkonto Wesizwe, has been sentenced to an effective 10 years imprisonment for conspiring to overthrow the government. He was arrested with a group of 45 recruits near Zeerust in the Western Transvaal. The 21-year-old Zuma, a son of a policeman from Nkandla in Natal, became involved in politics at a very early age and joined the ANC in 1959 when he was a mere 17 years. Zuma was one of the ANC's rising stars when the political party was banned by the government. So Caswells, I think, looked at this and said, but things don't seem to really fit in here. It doesn't gel with me. So he got a little squad to go and dig out the archives of the said newspaper and went back to this date, the 12th of August, 1963, the City Late edition. And that edition carried a dramatic front page story of the escape from Marshall Square Police Station of Abdullah Jassat, Arthur Goldrich, Harold Wolpe, and Mosi Mullah. But it actually had nothing about Jacob Zuma. And they looked at a month or two before that for all the newspaper articles, and they looked a little bit after that. And the only thing they could find on the 14th of June, 1963 in the Star was a little story which said, 45 Africans on their way out of the country. They were being held under 19-day detention law, allowing suspects to be detained in solitary confinement with no access to lawyers for up to 90 days at a time. No names were provided, and no other information was given about the identities of people in that newspaper, except that there were 2 Indians and an African woman who were amongst the group of 45. Now, that raises questions about history and the role of history in society, and how history can be used or abused for political purposes. We've had under apartheid distortion of history, silences of history, where the history of the liberation movement, for example, was never taught at schools and at universities. We've had to reinterpret our own history, but also what we're beginning to realize now is what this little chapter in his book talks about is really the falsification of history. Because things are said about the past, which actually is a far cry from the realities of the past. And we see now a period emerging where history is being abused for political ends and for political purposes. So history will be a matter of contestation, there's no doubt about it. Any historian will tell you that it is up for contestation. But it's important that we get authentic history, credible history. And I think that is what the foundation is committing itself to. So in the first years of the work that we've been doing, we've really got the major publications of Kathy, his prison letters, his memoirs, this beautiful coffee table book on Robben Island, all her visits, the historical visits of world leaders to Robben Island that Kathy hosted. And so there's a whole number of publications about Kathy. But we then moved on to the more populist series. And these are short biographical sketches of other leaders in the liberation movement and activists. So we've got, for example, of Auntie Mary Moodley, Albertina Sisulu, Comrade Isaac Makopo, Ibrahim, Dr. Jassett, and Abdullah Jassett. It's a whole series that we're running to try and make sure that the authentic, a credible history is presented of our past. And just before the lockdown, we launched, very importantly, Lalo Isuchiba's biography. It's a full book. And as Shani has just indicated, that we have now completed a book on the Naidu family. So that's Prema's, his generation, his children, his father and mother, his grandmother and grandfather. 4 generations of the Naidu family has been covered. 130 years of struggle history of the Naidu family. I don't think, I don't think there are many families like the Naidu family in terms of the contribution, the continuous, unbroken commitment to the struggle for freedom. His grandfather started work in 1894, 1895, even before the formation of the ANC and the Natal Indian Congress and the Transvaal Indian Congress. So that's an amazing history. I keep saying we hear about Gandhi. When he was in South Africa, the passive resistance movement, Gandhi went to Porter. Prema's grandfather in the same period was a lieutenant of Gandhi, went to jail 14 times. But nobody knows about it. Nobody knows about that. So we celebrate Gandhi. Quite often we've heard Madiba saying, you gave us Gandhi, we gave you a Mahatma. The Mahatma was really his grandfather. So hopefully that book, Shan, will, as you have indicated, will be launched on the 10th of April. So that's a few days from now. But we're also doing other work, the archival work, the collection of materials, liturgizing it, so that it is there for posterity, for the new generation, for this generation that has spoken so eloquently here. And then at the gravesite, you might have seen, we've got memorial stones of people beyond Kathy. So there's Komechiba is there, Dr. Dadu is there, Invis, Reggie, and Shirish Danebai's stones are there. But what we're realizing is we can't have a stone of everybody there. It's just not possible. So very shortly, we will be unveiling this thing here. We thought we'll do it in one go. So these are the names of comrades who served with them on Robben Island in their section, which is section B, am I right? So all those who were sentenced and who served their sentence in section B of Robben Island, we will be making, is it mosaic stones, tiles, and on that little section of there that you see the little brickwork there, which symbolizes the size of Kathy's prison cell, we will be implanting the names of every one of the people who served in section B as a once-off memorialization of the people who have made this massive sacrifice and contribution and going to prison on Robben Island. So that's the collective work that we're doing. It's ongoing work. And I'm hoping that this little sort of talk that we're presenting will inspire particularly the younger people. I know you look to the future. Your concerns are about tomorrow. But I hope some of you will take an interest in an authentic study of the past. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Isma. Let me also just thank the staff of the foundation for pulling all of this together, for making sure that you are here, to the service providers for the bus and the catering for these young people, who from here will go and have a picnic at the Wemapan or somewhere around here. But I'm going to ask the young people to do the kind of standing with the placards around the gravesite and lead us into song. And everybody else who wants to join, there are flowers to go and do your own dedications and prayers and reflections to all of the people who are there. And just on the right here, you know, as I was walking through this morning, is the gravesite of George Bezos. For those of you who want, Karima Brown is further down the road. You will find her gravesite as well. But please take time. Just do a stroll through here. You will see the range of luminaries of our struggle who are resting here today. That is so next to Uncle Kathy is Beyers Nodia, Reg September, Brawoli Khotsisile, and now George Bezos as well. So can we get the young people to do your guard of honor? What they want to do is make the commitment, Murphy, to this campaign, but in a way that also reflects the nature of the island itself. So once they are set up, I'll ask all of you to go over there, but let them just set up first. Okay. Yeah. Irfana, you guys doing the stuff around the gravesite now, please? Yeah. 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 Thanks. And the flowers, where are they? Ladies and gentlemen, and I thank you for your presence here today. Huge appreciation to all of you. Please go and selfie from here.